Dr. Scott, how do ovarian cancer clinical trials work? What is the process?
Oh, that's a great question. Obviously, when we're studying, taking care of patients with ovarian cancer, we want to try to improve the treatments that we have available. And oftentimes we come up with new and novel agents to try to study in the ovarian cancer process. A lot of us are very focus driven and we want to try to get these trials done as quickly and as safely as possible. But in all reality, from the time we have a new idea to when we can actually potentially get it into practice for patients can be decades at times. And so there's really, I think, a kind of a breakdown of how we look at the different clinical trials. And among these are the different phases of clinical trials. And these are things that we commonly hear when we take care of patients that I'm involved with different phases of trials. A phase 1 trial is one where we look at the safety of a drug or a treatment and look at the possible dose that we would utilize going forward for it. These trials are often very small. They often accrue patients, very quickly, and anywhere from 20 to 80 patients are usually enrolled in these trials. They're oftentimes done at specialized centers like large academic centers like UT Southwestern, where they have the ability to investigate new and novel agents and potentially look at different biomarkers within these trials. Once we identify that a treatment is safe and identify a dose that we would possibly utilize, then we would go to a phase 2 trial. And in the phase 2 clinical trials to identify to see if there's any clinical effect that's available with this treatment. And so these are usually trials that have between 50 and sometimes up to 300 patients in them. These trials are looking at to see, this investigational agent that we're looking at, whether or not there's going to be some benefit to a patient in the real world setting. Because oftentimes these drugs are developed in a clinical laboratory setting. We want to see when we bring it into the real world, do we get a benefit? If a benefit is seen in a phase 2 clinical trial, then we move to a phase 3 trial. And these phase 3 trials are very large trials. Oftentimes they're done nationally or internationally because of the size of them. They can have up to 1,000 to 3,000 patients in these trials. And what we're looking at is comparing this new investigational agent to a standard of care treatment, looking to see if when we incorporate this agent, do we see a benefit to the patients going forward to it? These trials can take many years as we look to see if there's a clinical difference within them. Oftentimes what we look at is there a change in the progression-free or the overall survival when we care for patients with ovarian cancer when we do these investigational trials. The trials, like I said, can last many years while we're doing it. And then when the trials are done, it could be several years longer before we get any benefit from the trials or we see any benefit. If a phase 3 trial is shown to be beneficial, then oftentimes we would take these trials to what we call a phase 4 or long-term outcomes effect. And this is basically where we follow patients going forward to see, how do they do? Are there any side effects? Are there any long-term effects on quality of life? And anything else that would go forward with these patients. These are, it's sometimes a very cumbersome process, but it's something that's, as we see as researchers, very beneficial to patients. When we do these trials, particularly when we get to phase 3 trials, you'll hear terms like double-blinded, placebo-controlled, and those can be some confusing to patients because obviously we don't know what those mean. And basically what the purpose of these different categories are is to make sure that that we're controlling to make sure that we're not, cheating when it comes to seeing what the outcomes are. Obviously, we want to see if there's a benefit to patients while we're doing these trials or these investigational trials. And we want to make sure that we're not biasing as an investigator, what we're looking to see as outcomes. So we want to make sure that we protect the autonomy of the trial to make sure that there's a benefit going forward. And this is it's a great process and something that large institutions and even smaller institutions are able to participate in to potentially benefit patients and then future generations of patients going forward.